Welcome to the lecture on language learning as part of the Open Developmental Robotics course organized by the IEEE Autonomous Mental Development Technical Committee. My name is Angelo Cangelosi. I work at Plymouth University in the UK, where I lead the lab on developmental robotics with a special emphasis on language. In this lecture, we are going to focus on the child psychology theories and child psychology data on language development. And we will show in different examples how these data and these theories can inform the development of robotics models, in particular robotics models that show a gradual developmental timeline of the acquisition of even more complex linguistic skills. You will see that the lecture starts with an introduction that compares nativist approaches to language development versus empiricist constructivist approaches. Then we are going to give an overview with some tables of the milestones and the principles, the biases that children use in learning language. And I'm going to list briefly models, just names of labs that have worked on different models on language learning. And then I'm going to focus on a few specific examples. These are really examples developed in my lab at Plymouth University. If you want to know more about this field in general language learning, I suggest you read chapter 6 of a book that Matthew Schlesinger and myself have recently published with the MIT Press, titled Developmental Robotics. So let's start to introduce the field by looking at two opposing views on language development theories. One supposes that the child is already born with some kind of innate capability to be ready to learn language. They are not claiming here that the child knows the language, because we know this is not the case. What they are claiming is the child has got some kind of innate mechanism. Chomsky calls this language acquisition device, which is ready to be tuned by the specific cultural language the child is exposed to. So in Chomsky's idea of linguistic representations, you have principles, you have parameters. So the principles are fixed. One principle is language must have a word order, universal principles. The parameters are tuned according to the language I'm exposed. But the brain already knows linguistic concepts or linguistic principles at least. This is in opposition to a growing set of theories on language development. They are called empiricists. They are also called constructivist language, constructivist because the child constructs its own language. They are also called usage-based theories because the child learns language through usage, through interactions, and empiricists because they refer really to the empirical interaction with the environment. Well-known researchers in the field are Tomasello, McWhinney, and related field, which is not only developmental but general linguistics, is cognitive linguistics. They say that knowledge like syntactic roles, syntactic categories, emerge out of the usage-based regularity in the semantic structure. So I can learn about the subject of a sentence and the verb, because I know that typically there will be words related to people, agents that perform an action, and the action refers, for example, to motor constructions. And of course, you will see that if we want to build robots that learn language from interaction, we are going to support an empiricist and constructivist view on language development. And you will see many examples later. In the book, chapter 6, you will see some detailed analysis of different milestones in language development. So if we want to summarize this briefly, we can say that in the first 6 months of age, the child does something called marginal babbling, which is just repeating sounds without any real structure. In the second set of 3 months, from 6 months to 9 months approximately, we have something called canonical babbling. So the sounds of the babbling start to resemble sounds of a language the child is exposed to. And later, in parallel to sound development, speech development, there is an intentional communication capability, for example, using gestures. This is what has been studied extensively by people like Tomasello, for example. Around the first birthday, 12 months, the child starts to use single words in isolation, names of objects, names for actions. It uses allophrases. This might be 2 or 3 words combination, but they are treated by the child as a single word, as a single concept. This is also the period when the child starts to combine single words with gestures. So the child can point and say milk by meaning give me milk and pointing at the milk. At 1.5 years of age, 18 months, we start to get 2 or multiple word combinations. And there is also an important phenomenon between 18 and 24 months called the vocabulary spurt, which is the sudden increase in performance in the language learning capabilities. And of course, by the 24th month, the child has richer linguistic and syntactic capabilities. Tomasello shows the concept of verb islands. So verbs are grouped thematically and then syntactically, and later you get more adult-like grammatical constructions. In this lecture, you will see that we have examples that focus on canonical, public, so on speech and phonetics, others on single words, and then gradually on multi-word combinations and so on. This is a representation that Tony Morse and myself developed as part of the Poeticon project, which really resembles the same milestones which I mentioned, plus adds some references to some of the main papers in the field. You will also see some phenomena like the U-learning phenomenon. This is called the inverse U-learning phenomenon. That means that in some cases, like for the formation of the past tense in English verbs, you can go from good performance, you can do regular and irregular verbs correctly in the early stages of development. Then at some point, children start to make lots of mistakes. This is when the curve of the error goes up. This is the case when, for example, children start to regularize, add ed to irregular verbs, like go becomes goed instead of went, like they used to do it. Of course, the child recovers this capability. This is when the U goes down again, when the child develops a better understanding of grammatical and morphological structures. You will see we are going to show the same diagram towards the end of the lecture to show how different experiments are trying to map these different stages in language development. Another important set of findings in the field of language development is the idea of conceptual and lexical biases, or they are also called principles. These are language and category development and acquisition principles that really exploit some of the regularities in the world or some of the capabilities of the child. There is a long list there. So one is the concept of reference. If you hear a name, the child assumes with its own bias that this must refer to the meaning of the word. There is something called whole part juxtaposition, the idea that you give priority to the object label for the whole object rather than for the part of the object. And then mutual exclusivity, which we are going to discuss later, and embodiment, which will have a big focus in our lecture in the coming slides. These are all biases studied by different researchers. So let me now give you a list of different set of studies which we'll review in the book chapter, but which also are available in the literature, to show how different researchers have been able to understand and analyze and model through computational models and of course through developmental robot models, different stages of language development. So there is a very important seminal paper, actually it's a book by Oudeyère, Pierre-Yves Oudeyère in 2006, which shows that a culture of agents can develop and emerge their own phonetic systems, for example, a set of vowels that corresponds to the human vowels. More recent work by Caroline Lyon and colleagues Christopher Nehanim and others at Hertfordshire University has focused on the transition from the acquisition of phonemes, sounds, speech sounds, to the gradual combination of these phonemes into whole words, and of course subsequently to the attribution of meanings to the words. This is a study done on the ICAP robot that shows how an instructor can teach names for shapes in a very interactive way and achieving a gradual incremental combinations of phonemes that lead to whole words concepts. Once the child or the robot has developed a set of words based on sounds, the child can actually focus on the conceptual aspects of it, which is the semantic aspects, the meaning attributed to each of these words. One again similar work was done by Luke Stills and Frederic Kaplan with the Aibo Sony Dogbot. And this was on the acquisition of the first words. And they demonstrated that if you use a rich interactive strategy versus a passive strategy, so interactive, the robot has to name objects, a ball, while it plays with it, versus a passive one where the robot is simply shown in a static way images or instances of objects, the social conditions is actually better. Another big contribution in the field is the embodiment bias studied by Tony Morse and Linda Smith in collaboration with our lab. And I'm going to discuss this in particular because this stresses the idea of the embodiment bias in the coming slides. In terms of compositional and grammar learning, sentence learning, we have studies, again, seminal studies by Juntani and his student Sujita. They show that you can have compositional semantics, you can get 3 verbs, 3 nouns, and they can be combined and you can get generalization out of this. And Stefano Nolfi, Elio Tucci and colleagues have developed this framework further, applying this to humanoid robots in terms of language learning with an evolutionary also component. And Luke Stills has also contributed significantly and more recently to construction theories and of language, and of course the robotics implementation. And there is a technique called fluid construction grammar developed by Stills and colleagues, which has been extensively used in a humanoid robot like the Sony Curio. More recent work, this has been done in our lab in Plymouth, is on the transition from naming objects for easy concepts, which is when I see a ball, I can say ball, I can recognize the shape, I can recognize the color, and I can see the color. So this is a relatively easy task. When I see or perform an action, I can do a mapping, a link between my action and my sound, which is the name of the action. But what about teaching a robot, or teaching a child if you want, the concept of number? One ball is one cup is one, but conceptually or perceptually there is no similarity. So how do children do this? Or what about abstract words? The concept of democracy, the concept of freedom, but even the concept of make. I make a plan, it's an abstract concept. I make a cake is a more practical concept. So how can a child, and of course how can a robot do this? And you will see examples, I briefly mentioned these examples developed by Marek Luczynski for number learning and embodiment, and Francesca Stramandinoli for the abstract word learning. Now let me focus on one specific example, which I want you to use as a prototypical way to demonstrate how you can build a robotic experiment where sensory motor embodiment strategies, the robot physical interaction with the world, and linguistic phenomena, the fact that you hear labels from a teacher, for example, how they can be combined together to allow the robot to develop a linguistic knowledge. In particular, in this case, at least at the beginning, learning of individual words, isolated words, names of objects or names for actions. There is a very well-known study developed by Linda Smith and Melissa Samuelson. Linda Smith leads the Baby Lab in Indiana in the US. We call this the MODI experiment. MODI is the label used by the researchers as part of the experiment. So you have a child sat on the lap of a parent, and the parent is sitting in front of a table. On the other side, you have the experimenter, and the experimenter shows two objects for which the child doesn't know the label. One object at a time. First on the left, object A, on the right, object B. You show A and B in turns, and then, this is crucial, you hide the object. You make sure that the child looks towards the right part of the screen, but maybe moving the hand, and you say, here, look at the MODI. So MODI is a new word. The child assumes MODI must be linked to the object, but the object is not there to be seen. However, the child has learned a map of his posture with space, so left and right position implies an active movement of the child. So when the child hears, look at the MODI, the child has activated, if you want, a postural memory related to the object that used to appear on the right. And these experiments are done with children between 18 and 24 months. This is, remember, the stage where the child can suddenly start to increase the dictionary vocabulary spurt. The diagram here shows the 4 experiments that they carried out in the original 2010 study. So the first column, you see these 2 objects. In step 1, one object is shown on the left. Step 2, a different object on the right. You do it again. Then step 5, you hide the object. And then suddenly you say, look at the MODI. Then you show the 2 objects again. You make sure the child engages in attentional mechanisms. And this is the test stage. Both objects are mixed in the middle, and you ask, where is the MODI? And if you do this, 73% of children, which is well above statistical chance, get it right, in the sense they associate the name MODI with the object that consistently appeared on the left. Of course, to make sure this is due to space and postural constraints, not to something else, the researcher ran the second experiment. That's the second column that you see here in the diagram. They make 50% chance. They create a condition where each object can appear in any position. And of course, if you ask the child to name the object, you get chance performance, 46 in this case. Plus 2 more conditions to further evaluate the characteristics. But the importance here is that between condition 1 and 2, 1 is called no switch, 2 is called switch, you get an improvement in performance, which means the child can name an object even when the object is not seen by using these postural embodiment strategies. So to summarize the theoretical aspects of this approach proposed by Linda Smith and colleagues. So children use their body, and in particular the relationship between the body and the object, for example the posture, the spatial positions, or in other cases the shape of the object, to learn new object-word associations, to learn new names. And specifically in the MODI example, you show that the posture is essential as a strategy to do this. So what we did in our lab, this is work done by Tony Morse and other colleagues as part of the iTalk project, European project. We implemented this MODI experiment using a cognitive architecture based on developmental principles called ERA, Epigenetics Robotics Architecture. And I'm going to show the diagram of the architecture in a moment. And in particular, this architecture has been used not only to model this, we call it the MODI setup, but also has been extended to model mutual exclusivity and to model all the word order in addition to some recurrent architectures. Well, I'm going to show you some diagrams on this. Let's focus first on the ERA architecture, epigenetic robotic architecture. This is a series of Conen maps. They are pre-trained, one map to classify color, recognize and classify color types, one to do shape, another to do body posture. This is the key map. In the middle, we call it the embodiment or body map or hub of the cognitive architecture. Then you have Hebbian connections, associative learning, between the most active units in each of the map. So all the units between maps are connected by Hebbian learnings, and these are learned, these Hebbian learning weights are learned online, which is during the physical interaction between the experimenter, Tony, and the robot, of course. We also use some inverse kinematic open source software routines available as part of the ICAP project to control the robot behavior. We also use a saliency map related to motion, because the child will first look at things that move, and then it gradually look at other aspects of the interaction, for example, speech. So if I don't know the name and I don't know here anything, I'm going to look at things that move. That's why the left and right experiments can be done, because the child continuously moves the attention towards the left and the right because it sees movement in the two directions. In addition, of course, we have language, so we need speech. In this specific example, we use a speech recognition system in the Macintosh operating system, OS, or you can use Dragon or other commercial softwares. You will see here a link to a video that I would like really you to see. You can go to YouTube and follow this. This is a demonstration that Tony Morse gives, first of what we called fast mapping. You show an object, the child sees the movement and it pays attention to the feature of the object, which is the object vision activates the most active units in the color map, in the shape map, and so on. Tony says the name, and of course the child makes the association, the child robot in this case. Fast mapping. Then the second part of the video shows a MODI setup where the object is shown, then the object is hidden. The researcher moves the hand in the same position and it says the name. This is the MODI. And this allows the robot to make the association.
So this is the iCub robot, and today we're going to teach it the names of some objects. I have here a truck and a ball, so let's see how we go. Ball.
Ball.
Truck.
Truck.
Find ball.
Find ball.
Find truck.
Find truck.
So when children learn the names of objects, those objects don't have to be in sight. It can be through association. So we'll show you how that works on the robot. So we show an object. Then we can hide the object. So, piano.
Piano.
And say, find piano.
Find piano.
correctly selected the right object.
red,
Well done.
well done,
The diagram here on the right shows two pairs of columns. The blue one is for the robot data, the statistics of the association between these objects and the labels, and the other column is the child data. And you can see a nice map of the 4 experiments. In particular, if you look at the first two, the pair on the left shows above chance performance, which is the consistency in left and right presentation of the objects, while the second pair of columns shows a chance, a 50% behavior both for the child and the robot. This work has been published very recently, 2015, in a paper in PLOS ONE, which is available open source by Morse and colleagues, including Linda Smith, our collaborator. And this is also an interesting experiment because thanks to the robot experiments, we were able to predict that when you change the position of the object from standing to sitting, you are actually disrupting in some way the experiment, but the change of position is a resource for the child. If you show the standard mode setup when you perform, when the child is sat in front of or the robot is sat in front of the table, and if you perform a slightly different interference task when the child is actually standing, you can see that the child can separate the two tasks and learn both, avoid any interference. This was a prediction that we made just by looking at the robot data, which was verified in real experiments done at Indiana, in Linda Smith's lab, to show that our robot prediction is true, which is a nice demonstration that in developmental robotics, not only we copy and take inspiration from child psychology, but we can also collaborate with child psychologists and show them how you get benefits in terms of further understanding of the principles, for example, language development in children, not only in robots. We have extended these experiments using the same ERA architecture. So Tony, in collaboration with Cathy Tomei from the World Baby Lab in Sussex University in the UK, investigated the mutual exclusivity principle. This principle says that the child assumes that a noun is picked up exclusively when you see a series of objects. So if I have 3 objects, I know the names of 2 objects, and I have a new object for which I don't know the name, and I hear a new label, then I assume for this mutual exclusivity principle that the new name must be related to the object without a name. This is a well-known phenomenon studied in psychology. What Cathy Tomei is doing is to understand better how you can break this mechanism. So typically you do mutual exclusivity experiments with one instance of the object, same color, same shape. So what they've done in Sussex is to change the features of the object. So in change 1, you only change the color of the same shape. Change 2, you can change slightly the shape of the object, and in addition to changing the color. And they show that in specific situations, the mutual exclusivity system approach stops the work. So Katie came to Plymouth, and we were able to demonstrate that the same ERA architecture can be adapted to represent this phenomenon. In addition, we have extended the child robot capability, from the second year of age, let's say 18 to 24 months, when the child is starting to combine 1 or 2 words together, first with gestures and with proper sentences. And we'll try to extend our model to this. Our ERA architecture, you will see with some modifications, to be able to replicate also the mechanism of word combination. And in particular, we focus on one phenomenon called the word order. So each language has a specific word order. In English, you put a person that performs the action. So the subject always first, I, eat, verb, apple if there is a transitive action. So specific word order. In other languages like Japanese or Latin, you put the verb at the end. So you say, I, apple, eat. But within each language, this is consistent. So developmental linguists like Kirsten Fisher has shown that word order is actually a developmental cue, a bias that the child can use to learn better its linguistic lexicon. So for example, it's not by chance that we say the dog, look at the dog, have you seen the dog? So in this case, the dog is always at the end. So this consistency allows the child to first learn the association between the dog, the object or the animal that it sees, with the actual representation. And we have many more examples of this. So we try to focus on developing these capabilities. And initially we applied a study conducted by Davide Marocco on modeling how a child robot, in particular a simulated ICAP, can be trained to understand the concept of word order. We have a task where you can see in the diagram the robot can interact with a ball, the rolls, with a cube that needs to be pushed, and with another object, a cylinder, which is anchor, which cannot be moved. So the child can learn to respond to instructions like touch, red ball, and also it can learn the difference between hitting, pushing, and touching, because the balls, the cubes, they will react in different ways. This was implemented not with the ERA architecture, but with the recurrent Hellman neural network. So what we did afterwards, we embedded the recurrent architecture that can handle time and therefore the time course of sequence of words with the ERA architecture. So the ERA architecture, the nodes in the speech system are activated by, for example, the Hellman network in a series of experiments where you propose a sentence like touch red cube. And this has been successfully extended as part of the Poeticon project, and you will be able to see videos and papers on this on the internet to demonstration of part of this. So if you go to the poeticon.eu website, you will see some movies on this. So let's go back to this diagram that we showed before. The time course of developmental stages: first year, more phonetic development, and then you get perceptual reorganization, individual words, first words. 18 months of age, between 1 and the 2nd year, you start to get vocabulary spurt and increase in performance. And then, of course, you get grammar development. And you can see in the above ICAP pictures, you can see that we have done an example that we already showed. The mode is set up on single words around the first 6 months in the first year of age, so 12, let's say around 18 months of age. The mutual exclusivity you see in the middle when you have multiple objects and you have to learn the name of one new object. And of course, you have then grammar constructions. This is a nice overview of how the same architecture can incrementally include and model different aspects of development, in particular for developmental robotics. I would like also to focus with a bit more time, although we can only spend a few minutes really, on number learning. So I said before, it's easy to teach a robot to name an object because you can see the object, you can see the shape with standard vision routines. You can name an action because you produce an action, or you can recognize the pattern of the action. But what about teaching a child concepts like numbers? 1, 2, 3, even, odd, more, big, small. So we don't need really to go far, because if we look at the way children learn numbers, it's really all about embodiment, sensory motor strategies. So we recognize finger counting is what we do constantly, what our children do constantly, what we do even as adults. We also do pointing. We don't passively tell a child there are 5 objects, count them by yourself, but we help the child by counting. So there is a well-known study by Alibali and Di Russo in 1999 that showed that if you allow a puppet or a child to point versus a condition in which the child passively has to count the objects, you get an improvement in performance. So if you look at this diagram here on the bottom left, the first column is the performance of the child in number counting in the condition which is passive. The second and the third are the condition where there is pointing gestures. One is the first column with the gesture is actually the puppet, an experimenter holding a puppet and pointing. The other condition is the child has to point. And then the next two are the child and the puppet actually touching physically each object. And you can see the improvement in performance when you allow the child a richer embodiment experience, first with pointing and afterwards with touching. So what we did, we wanted to use the same mechanisms to model how we can help a robot developmentally to acquire the concept of numbers. So Marek Ruciński developed this model based on a recurrent neural network Hellman type that can teach a child to the first two conditions: to count objects visually without any additional sensory motor strategies, or second condition, to learn to count when you have to you allow the child also the extra input of the pointing. So this is a diagram here on the left. It just shows the results of our conditions, the work done by Ruciński as part of his PhD at Plymouth. So the lower performance is the one in which you have visual plus, that is, you see the object. G minus means there is no gestures. Then the second one shows that when you get instead the additional gestures together with the vision, you start to get a significant improvements, which replicates some of the experiments. And here you see a screenshot of a video that demonstrates this Ponting study number learning. In addition, we have done another study, still on embodiment and development of number knowledge. This was developed by Vivian de la Cruz and Alessandro Di Nuovo. This is a collaboration between Plymouth University and Catania University, and also Enna in Sicily, where we have started to demonstrate that if you allow the robot to use the fingers to count, the robot can learn not only to repeat sentences or numbers in a meaningful way, and we can show that the representation of each number, it's increasing according to the size of the number, the cardinality of the number. But in addition, if you ask a child a question which is like an addition, can you do 2 plus 2, and you use the training based on finger counting, you get, without any additional training, a generalization of these capabilities, in particular generalization to the operation of addition. So there is a paper by De La Cruz and colleagues, which appears in the Frontiers journal, so open access available, January 2014, which describes this model in detail. Now, let me conclude this lecture. As we said, we started from a very general introduction to the milestones and the principles, the biases, that support the child acquisition of language, single words, grammar, and so on. And of course, we frame this approach within the field of empiricist constructivist view of language, because the child robot builds up its knowledge in a constructive way. Empiricists through interaction, user-based because you really learn by using the language in the physical context. We also show that different models have looked at different phenomena, so from phonetics to single words to multiple words of grammar, including abstract words like numbers, and other studies developed by Stramandinoli, for example, on concepts like make and use, which start to become a bit more abstract. Still concrete actions, but more abstract. Of course, this lecture has shown the importance of embodiment, of using sensory-motor strategies to learn to acquire the labels for first individual words, but later for concepts like numbers. I already mentioned a nice match between child psychology data and developmental robotics data, and the two-way collaboration. So typical developmental robotics takes inspiration from psychology, but we can also give back insights on developmental mechanisms. Of course, what we have shown here is relatively limited compared to the child knowledge of language. So a child at 3 years of age knows hundreds of words, or even more, knows complex grammatical structures. Our robots can only handle few words. So one challenge for future direction of research is to look at this scaling up of the lexicon, semantic lexicon, of course, speech lexicon. Of course, if you want to know more, you should do a bit of reading. So chapter 6 in our book discusses the examples I showed plus many more in detail. If you want to look at the more theoretical, forward-looking roadmap, there is a paper in the IEEE Transactions on Autonomous Mental Development, the Journal of the Developmental Robotics Community, a paper as part of our iTalk project published in 2011, which gives a nice 20-year timescale roadmap for research in this field. And if you want a more recent update on the field, there was a special issue on the Topics in Cognitive Science Journal in 2014 on developmental approaches to action and language learning and integration, which is language embodiment. And let me finally conclude by saying that, of course, I showed mostly examples from our lab, and this is thanks to the contribution from funding agency, in particular European funding and 2 FP7 projects, the iTalk integrated project, but also the FP7 Robot Doc ITN, Marie Curie Network on Developmental Robotics. So I really encourage you to do some additional reading, and you will also find links to videos and papers in these lecture notes. Thank you.